Hey everybody, I'm Ryan, this is the Will to Make, and today I'm going to show you how I built these scrap wood coasters. So I started off this project with some leftover cedar fence pickets from a raised garden beds build. I measured and cut a piece that will later be cut into 6 pieces in order to get my thickness on my turning blank. I wanted a contrasting wood in the middle, so I cut down a piece of this old shelf that was in one of our closets. I first cut the length a little oversized to be able to run through the planer. It was then cut down to the same width of my scrap fence picket. Once both pieces were cut, I could run both sides of each piece through the planer in order to flatten and clean the faces for the glue up. Once planed, I could cut my pieces down to a more manageable size for a turning blank, since I was only going to be cutting out 4 coasters. Like I said earlier, the fence picket was cut into 6 pieces, 3 pieces on each side of my contrasting wood. Now that everything was cut, it was time for the glue up. While gluing anything together, it's always best to spread the glue to the edges and make sure everything is covered for the best possible adhesion. Then I applied some clamps, making sure to keep even pressure throughout the whole turning blank. It's always good when you have a little bit of glue squeeze out. Then I could set it aside and let it dry. Once dry, I could remove the clamps. Over at the miter saw, I cut 2 clean edges on my turning blank. I then mark out the center of each side in order to center the blank on the lathe. Then the bit from the lathe could be hammered into one side of the blank. The blank was then chucked into the lathe. I then shaped my blank down till it was a cylinder. I wasn't going for a certain size, just whatever I could get out of the blank. Once it was a cylinder, I could sand it down, starting with 120 grit, then 220, and ending with 400 grit. My coasters now could be cut out of the cylinder. I cut them at a 1/2 inch, but I should have cut them a little smaller because they ended up being pretty thick. Now that my coasters were done, I could work on the coaster holder, again using some leftover cedar fence pickets, first by cutting out a square. I then found the center on both faces. I knew the final size would be around 5 inches, so I used this 5-inch sanding disc to mark where I could cut the corners off to save time on the lathe. The lathe bit was then hammered in and chucked into the lathe. The base was then shaped into a circle and sanded the same as my coasters. I could then make 4 marks evenly around the base where I will drill for my dowel. Using a drill bit the same size as my dowel, I drilled my 4 holes. I gave everything a quick sanding with my random orbit sander. Now I needed to cut my dowel down, so I placed all my coasters down and made a mark right above them. With a miter saw, I cut 4 pieces the same length. The holes were filled with wood glue, and after spreading it around, my 4 dowels could be installed and left to dry. Everything was then given multiple coats of some semi-gloss polyurethane. This was not the ideal brush for this job, but it's what I had on hand, and they still ended up looking great. With that, these scrapwood coasters were complete. I love how they turned out, and love that I used the contrasting wood in the middle, and I love that they were free. If you liked this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.